Welcome to the Getting Past the Premium podcast, everybody. This is a show dedicated to helping insurance agents shift their focus from selling products to delivering lasting advice. I'm your host, Elliot Bassett, and each week we pick the brain of some of the top names in the risk management space. We're bringing you actionable tips for growing and scaling your book of business. Now, let's meet this week's guest. All right, welcome back to Getting Past the Premium, everybody. Here with a friend of mine now that we met at an Insight event, Gunn with Houchens Insurance Group. I'm excited to have you on, Wells. Thanks for taking the time.
Hey, appreciate the invite. Thanks for having it. It was awesome meeting you out in Denver a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that was fun. Talk about a heck of a group of producers out there. So excited to kind of dive into that. You know, maybe that'll come up in the conversation, but wanted you to give everybody your background. You know, I love to hear how people got in the industry and how you got to where you're at today, and maybe a little background on Houchens as well to kind of know what you guys do and where you're at, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, man, happy to. So as you mentioned, my name's Gunn. I live in Bowling Green, Kentucky. So most will say, well, where is that? I'm an hour north of Nashville, Tennessee, right in between Nashville and then Louisville, Kentucky. Man, it's a cool story. So I'm a freshman in college. I grew up about 30, 45 minutes away from where I live today. And I was playing in the member guest with my grandfather, and I played with this really awesome guy. His name's Cecil Martin, and just over the course of the round, I say, Cecil, tell me about what you do. And I mean, he's got just a fascinating story. And Cecil's in the insurance business. And then, you fast forward about 30 days after that, he called my grandfather's law firm and said, hey, your grandkid, I enjoyed meeting him. I'd like for him to come intern with me. So that's really where it started at, was a casual conversation on the golf course as a 19-year-old kid that really didn't know much, right? I didn't know how to spell insurance at that time, and led into an internship where I work today. And I haven't always been in the insurance business. So I did that internship for a couple of years and then shifted more focus on the other things that's within the university, really more from a philanthropic standpoint. And then, I was in pharmaceutical sales right out of school, and then shifted into the insurance business. Always knew this is where I wanted to come to. I think God leads you to certain things at certain times. I think I needed to go through what I did to be able to be where I'm at today. So you fast forward, and I've been in insurance for quite a while now. And then, so what do I do for Houchens? I head up what I call the food vertical. So I'm the practice leader for what we call consumer staple and retail. So if you think about a grocery store, we insure grocery stores all across the country, and then the vendors and manufacturers and distribution companies that feed product into the stores.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're definitely focused on, vertical and niche. How'd you kind of dive into that? Like, was that more organic? I love getting people that have developed niches, because some it's very strategic and thought through, and some are like, I wrote a few of them and then just kept going. So how did you kind of get there?
It's cool. So if for those that don't know Houchens, so Houchens, our parent company is called Houchens Industries. We're 100% owned ESOP, based out of Bowling Green, Kentucky, but we've got holdings really across the country. A large focus is within Kentucky, but oddly, our largest holding company is grocery stores. So our sister company is a group called Houchens Food Group. They own roughly 400 grocery stores when you factor in some of the food components that come with that. And then was working in the hospitality sector quite a bit, working within grocery to a degree. And then we had an opportunity to go to NGA, which is the leading association for grocery stores. And that lead came from our food group partners, and just said, hey, we've got an opportunity if you guys want to go out there. And really, man, that you fast forward, our team that I sat on, we team sell. I sat on a team of 15, just phenomenal group. And some of my partners have been writing in this space for over a decade, more like 10, 15 years. And we just saw a need and an opportunity. And I always knew I'm very entrepreneurially spirited. And my family years ago was in the creamery business. We made cheese. We're an independent cheese maker, and we sold into independent grocers. So I've always had just a great respect for the independent grocer. And you take that expertise we've built internally, and then we focus that into the external network within the independent grocery space, man. And you talk about some really great people that feed America, and a lot may say it, man. I see it firsthand every day with people I work with all across the country. So it really came out of a great opportunity that we then ran with. And we're fortunate to write some really, really large co-ops across the country, retailers, manufacturing facilities, some of the nation's leading brands that are sold within the grocery stores. And that helps with a credibility standpoint, but then you just got to live and breathe in the space you work in. And I've taken that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's cool. I didn't know that. That's how you kind of got into that niche. So that's pretty sweet. And like I said, I love to kind of hear how different folks develop the niches they're in and whatnot. So before we get into more, because I really want to dive into what you're doing with the niche and the results that's leading to, because I think it's pretty special. But I want to go back to, first couple of years in the industry. I assume, did you start in production?
I did. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you're new producer. Walk through, and the reason I want to go down this path that I think is interesting, because obviously you've become and have really gotten good at your craft, and you've become successful at that producer role. And we talked to at launch, a lot of different young producers that are in that first 1, 2, 3 years, and whether or not they've got some guidance or some training that is good or bad, they don't really know how to get to that next level. So I'm curious to take you back to where you were at, first 1, 2, 3 years. Go back to that, kind of talk through how you were, what you were doing at that time, and how you were getting better in your sales skills, and what you were doing to improve, and then kind of take that into where you're at today.
Yeah, man, what a great question. And I talk about this pretty often because myself and 4 other gentlemen in the agency, we hold what's called the Growth and Accountability Group. We work with our new production team really from day one through validation, within the first 3 years of them being with us. And man, it's a tough stage. We call it the substage at Houchens, right? So we're a very short, fat organization. I mean, we just don't have a lot of bureaucracy with it, right? Yeah. So our CEO is a guy that helps head up a call every other week with what we call the mentee mentor group, but because we know that 1 to 3 years, and 1 to 5 for some people, it takes a little longer for some. It's such a pivotal time. And if you look at the turnover ratio across insurance as a whole, you may know the number. I don't know the exact statistic, but that first 5 years is likely when a lot of turnover happens. And it's because it's a grind, man. And, we've got guys making 100, 200, 300 calls a week for some of them. And the goal's setting a couple meetings. And you look, and I think that phase really works people out of it, right? I don't think everybody sees insurance as a glamorous job, and insurance is a great career. I think it's more of a lifestyle than it is a job, because you're never off, right? You're working 24/7. And when new producers come in, I don't know that they really see that on the front end. They normally see more of the lifestyle type standpoint, and that's what they're chasing. They got to figure out that servant mentality, the humility side of it, and you really got to train it. So I'm a big believer that you come in with certain skill sets. You've got to be able to hone those. And we partner with a group out of Texas called the Blueprint Group, which is headed up by Brian Jenkins and 2 of his brothers, Chad and Jeff. And man, they're our sales consultants. And they are really great at what they do. We've since also partnered with Larry Linney and the Insight Group, where I met you at, and we've honed in practice groups with them. But I say all that to say is, early on, you just got to find your cadence. You got to find your rhythm. You got to figure out what works. I'm also a believer that you can set out a core foundation that should be able to be replicatable. I think people have to make it their own as well. And so just early on, man, I embraced the process. I listened. I was coachable. I really think if producers get tied in with really great agencies, they're great agencies for a reason, right? I see firsthand around me. I'm on a team of 15, and of 15, there are 7 senior producers, and we've got 8 newer producers on the team. And we tell every new producer we bring on, if you just follow our process for 3 years, you will come out the other side and be successful. You're going to have a lot of tough times. And that's why we believe that the camaraderie within it is really imperative, because you don't want somebody to be out on an island and they're making call after call. They're trying to learn insurance at the same time, which you and I both know is a foreign language at first.
Oh, yeah.
And it's especially challenging. I'm a believer in specialization, and we've morphed that into the agency. And that's really how we got linked in with Larry Linney. But I think it's hard to be an expert at all
Yeah, I
Class of
agree.
the business. How do I know how to write food manufacturing and then also go shift to construction? Then I shift to coffee shops. Then I shift to architecture and engineering firms. And then I go shift into surety. And it's hard to do that, in my opinion. I know there are some that are, kind of jacks of the trade, and they can morph into anything. I just think you're better if you can just really hone into your craft. The challenge is, though, Elliot, in my opinion, and you see this firsthand, right, as you and I are talking about just the businesses, you got to think big, and some are bound by geography. We are not bound by geography. I write all across the country. Majority of my book of business isn't within driving distance. It's not within the state, not within driving distance. So you got to figure out how do you immerse yourself into their world, and their world is clients and prospects world, right? And you can't just say it. You got to live it and breathe it and be a part of it. So that's really what I've done. And once I embraced that and really went all in, that's when you start seeing a difference. Because early on, and you talk about getting past the premium, having the transactional mindset is a shortfall, honestly.
Yeah.
And you don't want that type of business, right? I know there are some that quote. And hey, I'm not saying we never quote, because sometimes you have to. But we're believers in, we want people to hire us to go buy insurance on their behalf. We want them to hire us to go sell their account to the carriers. Yeah. And, you can have what we call like a market mayhem. I love that phrase from Brian Jenkins, and it talks about you have 4 or 5 agents and everybody goes to the same carriers, and you get market fatigue. You get where people all of a sudden they've seen the account from 4 or 5 times, they've never had an opportunity to write it. That's not how you proactively buy insurance. And that's really what we do. We go in and do. And then ultimately we just try to be an extension of our clients, the risk management, the finance team, to just have a seat at the table with them and do what's best for them. Not always is what's best for them is best for us. And you got to get past that.
Absolutely. Oh man, there's a lot in there. So one thing I want to highlight for, specifically the young producer is, I loved how you said embrace the process. And I was almost thinking, like, because you called it the suck stage, it's like embrace the suck to a degree. Because there is, as you're building any business, because that's what you're kind of doing as a new producer, you're building your own little business. There can be tough times, and you have to just put in some of the work. Now, I think doing that strategically is also smart. So have the process that is going to get you to where you want to get to versus just focusing on activity. I mean, activity is the most important thing, but don't just do activity to do activity. It has to be leading you to the results you want to get, and getting you closer to your goals. And so I think that's super important.
I agree, because you're right. I mean, just because people work hard doesn't mean they're going to be successful. And I think there's a couple core attributes that help that, but being strategic and following a process. I've got a binder sitting on my shelf here, and it's what we utilize for it's kind of our holy grail for our new producers. And it's a process, but it's not just the grind of calling; it's the grind of learning. And how do you hone your craft? How do you understand audits? How do you understand the different facets of the agency? How do you understand different facets of the carriers? And then, most importantly, how do you understand what your client base needs? And how does their business operate? And I think you have to be intrinsically motivated to help others. I think that's a part of it. I believe in you got to be a servant to those you're working with. But I mean, you got to be curious. And you said it. Your book of business, or our book of business, that's my business. That's my livelihood. Now, yes, it is within the agency. Yes, I work with a big team. But at the end of the day, that's my business, and that's how I run it, man. And that's why, we build business plans for our practice group. We build business plans for our individual books, and the junior partners that sit on our practice group with us, and the senior partners, man. We all look at it holistically and have one common goal, and that's what we're out chasing together.
Totally, yeah. I think one of the things I heard at the Insight event we were at, I don't remember who said it, but it's, as a producer, you're essentially a franchise of the bigger agency, right? Of the agency that you're at. Because when you think about that, it's such a good metaphor, because your book is kind of like a franchise. The agency is going to have certain beliefs and values and core values and everything that they want to operate within, and processes and stuff. But within that, you're able to go out and find your own clients and figure out who you want to build relationships with, what niche you want to approach, as long as it's within the guidelines of your agency. which is one of the beauties of our industry, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the keys, man, and what a great group in the Insight. This is year 2 of a training called the $1 million Producer Challenge, right? We're pushing each other to go write $1 million in new business every year. And there are people in that group that do it consistently, right? And there's guys in there that are, and I think it goes back to honing our craft. There's guys in there that have written in excess of $1 million a year for a number of years. I think one of the leading books in there is probably close to $10 million. When I met him last year, he was at 7.5. He wrote another $2.5 million this year and retained over 100% business. So, he is an extremely sharp guy. But what I loved about him, his name's Rick, and I won't say his last name just out of confidentiality, but what I loved about Rick, and I wish every new producer would realize this, he's got that big book of business. You and I have a ballpark of probably what he earns a year, but then he's taking time out every month to be on calls. He's taking the quarterlies, he's giving an hour and a half. He's doing annual meetings. And it just shows you that regardless of your skill set, regardless of where you're at, you got to keep striving to be better. And that's what I love about our business, because there's no ceiling to how successful you can be. Time is probably the one piece of that. But, how do you become the best? How do you differentiate yourself? You understand the business, you understand the client's business, because it's not just insurance, right? It's understanding what's the world you're living in. And that's why I go back, I believe, in the specialization, because how do you really understand and lean into the business of our clients if you're not fully immersed into it, right? If you don't understand the supply chain challenges, if you don't understand their manufacturing process or their distribution process, or who's their end users and what's the challenges they face and how do we remove those barriers. So I'm a believer in that, and I think what you said is exactly right. As a new producer, how do you get to that point? It doesn't happen overnight, and I think that's the tough part. A lot of people, a new producer, come in and say, like, "Hey, this is how we hit it, and we do it really, really quickly." It just doesn't work that way, Now maybe some have a great network and family, but eventually that runway is reduced, right? It does. You got to go out, and you got to cold call, you got to find the business, and then at some point, those introductions, you do a really great job. Referrals are real, but it takes time to get that. You don't get that in 3 to 5 years, right?
100%. So let's dive into that, because you just mentioned it. The group we met at was the $1 Million Producers Group with Insight. And I want to just clear up a couple of the numbers. That's $1 million of new business production revenue in a given year is what the goal for each person in that group is. And when Wells said there's, gentlemen at $10 million book, that's a $10 million book of business in revenue to the firm. And so I think one of the things that I've seen over the years, and Larry has helped me at every stage, is just what's possible. I remember years ago when we'd go from thinking a $200,000 premium year was a good year for somebody, because we're personal lines and a bunch of small commercial, and thinking, wow, there's people writing 100, 150 of revenue every year. And now, I see a group of folks that are shooting for $1 million in revenue every year in new business. And so I want to set that stage, because there's a lot of probably producers out there thinking that doesn't even make sense. It's not even possible, right? So let's break down your strategy a little bit. And I think you can hit this from whatever angle you want. I think as you're now established a little bit, it's probably more referral driven, and you've established yourself as the expert. But even leading up to getting to this point, how are you generating leads? I think that's probably the biggest thing that producers can struggle with, is generating leads. And then once you get the lead, like what sets you apart so that you can close that deal? What are you doing differently than other people?
Man, what a great what a great question. There's a lot of ways to go there, but I think I'll break it down into individual pieces of this. Early on, how did I get my business? It was cold calling, right? Yep. All the relationships I have, and I felt like I was a very well-connected person. Either you look at a business, and just because it's a big business doesn't mean it's a big insurance account, right?
Yeah,
you see
so
that,
true.
Right? And the group I work with within our local state, regionally, the big account, we wrote them all. All the ones I was tied to, it's either we already wrote it or there was a reason we didn't write it. So I had to go out and drum out business from the ground up. So early on, man, it's cold calling was how I did it for for quite a long time. And I still strategically, they're normally not cold, they're warm now, but I feed into it for myself and my team within the consumer staple retail team. A big piece of our prospecting and how do we meet people is conferences. That's where the food industry is really big into the conferences and associations. So I'm a believer you go where your prospects and your customer base are. And for us, strategic conventions throughout the year are how we do that.
Yeah.
So I think you could go ahead.
Can I pinpoint something there? Because I do think right now you're hearing so much. It's almost like cold calling is a bad word, right? Yeah. And it just, when you talk to anybody, it seems like that has done not just cold calling, but has built their book of business and they're now successful. It seems like at some point, I'm not going to say 100%, right? But a lot of folks were at one point doing cold calling because it's the one prospecting activity, and cold calling could be phone calls, could be drop-ins, could be all the things, right?
Right.
That you can always fall back on and rely on. You can always pick up the phone. And so I think it's just, I don't like that it gets this black sheep mentality because it has a very important place. It may not be what you want to do for the next 30 years. To your point, now you're much more referral driven. Maybe you got into some marketing and all that stuff, but that takes time to build your network, to build all the things that you need for those other strategies to feed you. And in the meantime, you got to do cold calling. So I want to just real quick, when you were starting out and you were doing that cold calling, you were also writing the accounts, right, that you would bring in. How long did you, how many calls do you think you were making per week? And how long were you doing that until you saw that shift to where, okay, now I have a decent sized book of business. Yeah. I'm validated. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I think a lot of people want to immediately jump into, I'm writing a bunch of accounts and it's all great, when you still got to make 100 calls a week or 200 calls a week or whatever.
And it is. So for me, my number, and we go back to the process, right? Yep. The process that was laid out by one of my senior partners at the time was you got to make 100 calls a week at a minimum. So my number was always 100 or more, right? Because what our math is 100, you got to get 2 appointments a week. And then all of a sudden the math works itself out, right? Because we understand close ratios. You got to know your numbers. I challenge any new producer, current or future, that listens to this, is always know your numbers. You got to understand how many calls do you have to set up X amount of appointments, right? You got to have a goal. What are you striving for? You will fail if you just say, okay, I'm just going to cold call. If you don't have an end goal in mind, then you'll that's where the burnout phase will get.
Yeah.
So for me, it was, hey, I need to make 100 calls a week because I always want to get 2 appointments a week at a minimum, right? Now, fortunately, if I make 10 calls, likely I'll probably get 2 appointments or more out of it. But that took years to get to it.
Yeah.
I bet you I had to do that process for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But the cold calls turn into warmer calls, right? Because they're follow-ups.
Yeah.
I love what you said. So there's a negative connotation around cold calling, but it's all about how you approach it, right? We're in a relationship business, and some of my closest friends are my customers. Hey, I've built great friendships out of prospects that I've called on. And one of my partners who's in the office next to me, his name's Adam Burton. And Adam always says, man, sometimes being second's not a bad thing, because in our business, we know people retire. There's mergers, acquisitions. There's sometimes a relationship fallout. But if you don't doing that legwork on the front end, that's where you really build that out.
Yeah.
In those cold calling days. But I also am a believer that, just like you and I meeting casually, right? And then you invited me on the podcast. But I'm able to articulate well because I stumbled for so long doing cold calls. That's where you learn. It's just not about calling. It's how do you learn how to communicate? How do you learn how to be simple yet deep in conversation? And so much of that, I tell people, man, that grind stage in cold calling is how you set up the foundation of learning how to communicate at a higher level.
Yeah, it's so good. I know, and yeah, I wish that people could see the power of cold calling, and doing it the way that you referenced is so true. I mean, a couple things. Number one, I can't remember the amount of times I'd get an opportunity by somebody just being like, you've called on me the last few years, haven't you? And I just had a conversation or whatever. And they're like, you know what? Why don't, let's meet. I'd like to see what you got. And then how many times have you gotten this where the one year you skip calling because you're like, geez, I've called on that guy and talked to Wells 5 times in the last 2 years. Like, he's just never going to do anything. And then you call in 6 months and they're like, oh, shoot, I wish you would have called. We just moved our business to so-and-so. And you're like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
How many times that's happened, I don't know. But
And I tell you, Elliot, one advice I'd have for a new producer, right? You got to have the activity early, because that's how you're building your skill set. That's how you're building your network. Because a lot of producers, some may be a second career person like myself that has a small stint outside of insurance. Others may be 10 or 15, 20 years. Some may come right out of school. But the one thing is, in insurance, you talk to so many people, you have to be extremely organized, and you got to articulate yourself very well in your note taking, because if I'm going to call you back, I want to make sure I understood what our conversation was before, and when should I follow up? Because for guys that are and or ladies that are just calling, but they're not tracking themselves, they're not taking notes, they're not figuring out who are the key decision makers, man, they're burning those calls, because you'll never know what to reference back. So I'm a believer in strong activity, strategic activity, but it's got to be trackable. You got to understand the conversations. You got to understand the follow-ups. And then you got to have the consistency to make sure you are following up, to your point. Because we've all been there, right, where we just missed an AOR because we didn't follow up.
Oh, yeah. The fortunes are in the follow-up is really how you need to look at it. But okay, so then now let's move to more present day and talk about kind of what your year looks like.
Elliot, can I mention one thing real quick before we go there? Man, so when we were in Denver for our small group that came together here after our first year of completing the program, I'm having dinner with a guy that is 32 years old. And the last year he wrote 800,000 new revenue. Year before he wrote like $1.2 million. The year before he wrote $1 million, right? So I mean, relatively young guy for industry standards. Had been in insurance all along, and he and I were talking, and I said, man, how do you find your success, right? What did he oversees a practice group as well, and then also the new producers within his agency. And I said, man, what's your foundation, right? I mean, obviously he does specialize, that's a part of it, but he said, man, we teach people how to cold call really good. And he says, I said, okay, how have you written your business? And he said, all cold calls. He said, I wasn't from a family where I had these relationships that were CEOs or CFOs of mega sized companies. He said, man, I just did it the old Hard Knocks way. I followed up. I was consistent, had a great cadence within his process. And I thought that is something awesome, right? Some of us referral. And he says today he wrote 800,000 and majority of it came from cold calling. And he's been in it 12 years, right? Over 12 years now. So I thought, man, what a great learning standpoint that I've shared with my young producers as well. As sometimes you never grow out of it, because that's where you get your business. And I mean, and just getting used to it. It's like working out, none of us like to go work out or pick anything you don't want to do, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the more you just get into your routine, and it doesn't affect you as much, right? So that's awesome. I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up, because it shows you that there's a lot of people they find what works and they just do it. They put in the reps. That's exactly right.
And it's not one size fits all. I think that's what sometimes when I'm seeing stuff online, it's just like, here's the new way to get clients, and here's the silver bullet thing. And, it's just, at the end of the day, you just got to put in the work to figure out what works for you, what's working to get your target prospect that you want. Test those strategies, improve and refine those strategies, and then go and do them over and over and over. And you'll see success if you do that. But let's jump to today for you. What does prospecting look like? And then once you get that opportunity, how are you standing out against competition that you might be going up against? What are you guys doing differently?
Yeah, so great question. So today, prospecting for me, referrals, I've been very blessed by some wonderful clients that have become great friends that do refer me into their friends or their networks when they hear somebody's got challenges. Conferences are a big piece for me. That's where and I look at prospecting more as networking, right? How do I continue to network with folks that I'd like to work with? Conferences are a big part of that, but also still is following up on cold calls or warm leads that I've just got to stay in touch with. That's really what my early stage prospecting now looks like.
Yeah. And then, okay, so You're nurturing those when you get the referral or whatnot. I mean, obviously, I think if you're getting a referral, you're typically further down the funnel, right? You've got some validation there, but still, you got to be able to prove that what this client referred you to is legit. So how are you standing out? You know, if you say you're going up against a big other shop, how are you standing out to the rest of the competition?
And I think that's valid, right? So we're a top 45 size shop. You know, we're in excess of 100. I think we're probably 115 million or so agency from a revenue standpoint. So, you know, we're not one of the megas, but we're a good size. We've got the type of premium dollars to leverage. We'll handle $1.5 billion or so in premium. So, but we're going against the guys that have, you know, 50, 100 type of $1 billion type of premiums, what they're handling. So, you know, it's all about skill set, right? It's a big piece of it. And how do you understand? And what I would tell you that has been the game changer for me in my career is going in and just living the space, right? Understanding how the clients that I represent in the space that I am, I understand how they operate. I understand the lingo. I understand the challenges, whether that be operationally or capital expenditures that they're facing down the line, or you know, what's going on in the supply chain and how the tariffs come in and affect it. So I think when you can speak your clients or your target audience's language, and you're automatically a leg up, because all of a sudden they feel like, wait a minute, you understand my business. But I'm also one to not shy away from hard conversations, right? We understand that, you know, insurance and Elliot, we go by retention rates, right? So of the business we write, how much do we retain? Industry standards in the low 90s. We're fortunate to be quite a bit higher than that. But most of the guys are fighting after a small piece of that. And they understand that, you know, sometimes no's no, right? Sometimes relationships get in the way and you got to be there when something tough happens. But insurance is a real challenge regardless of the industry, right? I mean, it's always going to be one of the top line items on their P&Ls for most companies, and understanding that and figuring out, hey, how can I make them better than they are today? Or how can I take this heavy lift from somebody in the risk department team because they're lean? How can I make that better? But a lot of it is also helping uncover stuff that they may not know that they're facing, right? They never looked at it, right? How all of a sudden, how does succession planning play into insurance? Well, you and I both do, but most agents don't talk about it, right? How do you look at their overall risk profile, and how do you make sure that the risk tolerance within the company aligns with the insurance policy, right? Somebody's got a really high risk tolerance, but their insurance program doesn't align to it. Well, all of a sudden there's premium dollars on the table that they should have been saving for a long time. So I think it's all of those things. You just gotta live and breathe the industry. You gotta understand it. You gotta make sure you're in a network where, you know, I want people always, whether they're clients of mine or they are people that I just network with, that if they say, man, I really need X, I want them to think of me, to call me and let me navigate them to an introduction of somebody that I built out in my network. I've got a strong Rolodex of other vendor partners that service the industry that I operate within, because I understand the value of partnership, right? I understand the value of being able to be a connector within people. But I also have to validate those connections. I'll never send somebody to a vendor or to some type of service contractor if I don't personally know them, or being able to give them a testimonial from a different client, because, you know, we are our name, right? And it takes a lifetime to build a good reputation, but it only takes one bad decision to run it. So I guard that, and I think it's important to understand it. And I challenge producers always. We all want to go out and write business, right? But we have a limited number of carriers for most of the time for certain industries. I mean, you also got to guard and protect your carriers, because you don't want to put a tough risk just because you want to write the account. But man, what if that hurts that block of business within your agency and within your network that you're working within, whether it be a practice group or a vertical or whatever they may title that within their agency? Sometimes you got to say no and walk away, right? Because it's for the betterment of your other clients that operate within that space. It's maybe better for the carrier, and that's tough. But that's a mindset shift, right? That's when you got to operate it as in your business.
Totally. Yeah, you're not just the salesperson. I totally agree with that. And I love how you said that, because there's additional value in areas that, if you're just looking at it from that transactional insurance sales model, you're not thinking about, right? Just because I say this all the time, I'm in the same boat you are of connecting folks to other people in your network that can help them in various areas is hugely valuable. And that's just a small example of one of the things that we can be doing that shows value outside of just selling the product. But I wanted to see, do you have when you talked about their risk tolerance and you're uncovering some of those problems and things, I mean, have you built a set process you go through there? Or is that just something you've kind of molded over time?
Yeah, so really great question. So I've spent a lot of time on this and within our sales process that our agency follows now. Shout out to Brian Jenkins. He's been a great partner of ours, and shout out to Larry Linney and Nate and the team over at Insight, because we've utilized both of these guys. And you got to find a process that works for you, right? But there are core foundational models that work if you follow them. And then, yes, you change some of the verges, you fitted it within your style, but there still is a process. And I want to be a consultant. I don't want to be a salesperson, right? I want to be able to educate and inform and help people make a decision that will positively impact their business and protect them from things that maybe they didn't even know are potential threats. That's not being salesy, right? I want to be the opposite of that.
Totally.
And having that process is important. But I also think about having a process that's proprietary to me is important, and to our practice group or the agency as a whole. And every practice group sits standalone within itself, right? I operate my own business within the agency is how I look at it, and that's how the agency looks at it. And what my process may vary some from others because of the needs of the industry I serve. I still have a process, and my team that works within the consumer staple retail team, they have the same process. And we want to make sure that from an educational standpoint, our team goes through a rigorous training to make sure before they can ever call on somebody that works within our group, because that's what's important. And I love, and Larry Linney said this, and there's other ways to articulate it, but the way he articulated it really set home with me is sometimes you have to step back and work on the business, not just in the business. Most people are really good at working in the business, the day-to-day grind, but they don't come up a level and say, okay, what am I doing? Is it working? What are my future goals? What are the things I need to implement today that will make life better, not just for me, but for my clients for years and years to come? And you can't just do that once. You got to consistently reset and make sure that you're doing the right things. And having a proprietary process that we follow and having those guardrails, that's how we're able to get producers up and going and validated at a quicker time frame, because we have those parameters already built. They don't have to go recreate it for themselves. They've got to plug into our process.
Yeah. So Trent, I think one of the big things there that you mentioned is having the process, implementing it. It allows you to improve it. If you're kind of making it up every time you go in, it's just like, how can you get any better when you're not tweaking? Okay, this one, our presentation, like we were really confident leading up to it. We lost it at presentation stage. What happened? All right, let's tweak this. Let's change that. Or you start losing deals right around your assessment or your discovery or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Are we asking the right questions? Are we diving deep enough? It's just, you can't truly get any better if you don't have that replicatable process.
Yeah.
And then also, as you think when you start to lead a practice group and you've now got people coming in underneath you, like how do you train them on the process if it doesn't exist? But one of the best things I felt like you said in there too was having a proprietary process that only you do.
Yeah.
And that provides so many different angles that you can use with a prospect. You can use it in your cold calling. Hey, we have a proprietary process that gets you to act from X to Y, or that here's what other people in your industry have said about our process, or whatever. It's something that, again, nobody else can replicate. Other firms can sell travelers. Other firms can sell whoever, right? They can't replicate what Larry would call your IP, your intellectual property. They can't replicate that. And so it's just so important to be putting in the time and the energy to develop it on your own, and then go out and use that in your sales, in your process. So I love that piece of it too.
Yeah, and man, it's such a mindset shift to get to that side of it, right? To where you have a process, you follow it, you tweak it as you need to, but you're always going back and revisiting that, right? How's it working? Where am I falling short?
Yep.
And always keeping the customer front and center, right? Because we go in, we do a proprietary process, and I won't bore you with all the different stages of what we follow. But at the end of the day, it's awesome if you can identify, right? Hey, here's the risk. Here is an assessment I did. It's showing X, Y, Z. But you got to have the deliverable side of it is, okay, hey, you're at X. Is this important to you? And if it is, I can show you how to get from X to Y. And then you got to be able to follow through. And for long-term success and long-term partnership with folks, and I'm a big partnership person, is you can't just identify it. Okay, that's great. Anybody can identify if they can have the process. It takes a whole nother level of commitment to identify and help them put the right things in place to make them better. And then all of a sudden you want to work yourself into a place where people, it's not about premium on an account, right? It's you're adding so much more value that somebody can't imagine firing you because of all the value you bring to their organization.
Bingo. Yep. They'll pay more to stay with you. I think that's also interesting to me. With our business, we're not in a position to set the ultimate price of the product we're selling. But too often it's like, well, our carrier's more expensive. We almost just like give up. And it's like, well, there's a lot of industries that you look at that people buy something that's more expensive because they see more value.
Right.
Luxury cars wouldn't exist if people didn't see more value, or, name anything, right? And our industry as a whole doesn't always treat it that way, where it's like, we're not setting the price, so we have to try to sell it at the lowest cost possible. And it's like, well, if the carrier you have is the best that you think it needs to be, and is providing the right coverage for the client and everything that it needs to, but it's 5% more, that 5% is you, and you got to make that up and show that value.
Yeah.
And sometimes, honestly, that might be better for them to go in a different direction. You got to be able to tell them that as well.
That's exactly right. And because you look at it, and outside the industry may not if they don't touch us a lot, but a lot of people look at insurance as the certificate of insurance, right? They look to say, okay, do I have these limits? But it's really not saying, okay, you operate within this parameters of your company. This is what you do. This is what you make. Am I covered for this? Am I covered for bodily injury? Am I covered for catastrophe? What are my limits? What are my deductibles? Insurance is a contract. Not everything is covered in a contract, right? Mm-hmm. What's outside of those parameters? Because all of a sudden you may say, oh, well, I'm saving 5%. Well, you're really not. What if this happens? You may be self-insuring it. All of a sudden you're not saving 5%. It's costing you 150% more because you didn't have coverage for it.
Yep.
And understanding that, but in an educational way, right? I think you got to be informative. You can't just sell it, right? Because at the end of the day, we got to do what's right. And you hope that right leads to you being able to represent somebody, but sometimes it may not.
Totally agree. Well, man, this has been great. I want to make sure we're being respectful of your time. Was there anything we missed in that whole conversation? We covered a lot of ground, everything from you as the young producer to today, but anything you want to make sure we let everybody know about?
No, man, I think, as I'd speak to the younger producers, I think that the key is you got to get in, you got to follow a process that works, right? Do something that's replicatable, but man, you can't put a price tag on great mentors. And I challenge, we didn't talk about mentors, but I've been fortunate to have a lot of really great mentors in my life. And a lot of those are partners that I work with every day today. And some of those are outside the agency. But, I challenge a new producer, man, if you don't have a great mentor, you got to find one. Because if you look at any successful person, if you go to them and say, hey, what's attributed to your success, I would believe that a great mentor is going to be on that top 3 list of what's helped them get to where they are today. So I'm very thankful for those that have poured into me. And, my goal is to pour into others because I think that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think everybody's going to take a lot from this episode. So really appreciate you. If anybody wants to learn more about you or just Houchens in general or what you guys are doing, how could they get a hold of you or what's the best way?
Great. Obviously, I'm pretty active in LinkedIn. So Wells Gunn with Houchens Insurance Group, or they're welcome to reach out to me personally. And my email is wgunn, Gunn, at higusa.com. And happy to call my cell phone as well, 270-404-0823.
Wow, giving out the cell phone too.
I don't mind a bit. That's right.
All right, man. I appreciate you, and everybody should take him up on that, because obviously, Wells is having a ton of success, and I think doing it the right way, which is awesome. So, well, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for the time.
Hey, thank you, man. Enjoyed it.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. This podcast was created to help shift the mindset of the insurance industry, to help us go from being product peddlers to true risk management advisors. It's that same philosophy that led us to create Launch, a risk management tool that helps you, the producer, have in-depth conversations about a client's risk. Launch walks you through the assessment process, builds in-depth reports and risk scoring based on your client's answers, and delivers the presentation tools to help you close the deal. Check it out for yourself at getlaunch.io, and let's start shifting the mindset of the industry together.